"What is this, miss?" the Apache cried. She looked down in horror and whispered, "Please." The morning began like any other in the small town resting near the wide open lands of the reservation. The sun rose slowly, spreading soft golden light across the quiet streets. A light breeze moved through the trees, and the air carried the smell of dust and fresh bread from a nearby bakery. Nothing about that morning suggested that it would be remembered for years to come. Miss Eleanor Carter parked her car in the school's small gravel lot and sat there for a moment, watching children walk toward the building. She liked arriving early. It gave her time to think and prepare herself before the noise of the day began. Teaching was not just a job to her. It was something she believed in deeply. She believed children needed more than lessons from books. They needed patience, attention, and someone who truly saw them. She gathered her bag, stepped out of the car, and walked toward the school entrance. The building was simple, made of red bricks that had faded over time. The windows reflected the rising sun, and for a second everything looked peaceful and hopeful. Inside, the halls were still quiet. Her shoes made soft tapping sounds against the clean floor as she walked to her classroom. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room felt calm, filled with early morning stillness. Posters of letters, numbers, and encouraging words covered the walls. A small bookshelf stood near the window, filled with stories about heroes, animals, and adventures. She had arranged the desks in neat rows the day before, but she always liked to check them again. Miss Carter moved from desk to desk, straightening chairs and placing fresh sheets of paper neatly on each one. Today's plan was simple. In the afternoon, the class would have art time. She loved art days because children often revealed parts of themselves through colors and drawings. Sometimes they showed joy, sometimes they showed dreams, and sometimes they showed things they could not say out loud. As the clock moved closer to the start of the day, the school slowly came alive. Doors opened, lockers shut with small bangs. Laughter echoed down the hall. Soon, her classroom door opened, and the first group of students rushed in, full of energy and chatter. "Good morning, Miss Carter," they called out together. "Good morning," she replied warmly, smiling at each of them. She noticed who came in loudly and who slipped in quietly. She always paid attention to those small details. Children spoke even when they were silent. Among the last to enter the room was Daniel Redhawk. He walked in slowly, holding his backpack close to his chest. His dark hair fell gently over his forehead, and his eyes seemed older than the rest of him. He was small for his age, thin and quiet, almost like he was trying not to take up too much space. "Good morning, Daniel," Miss Carter said softly. He gave a small nod but did not speak. Daniel had been in her class for several months. From the very first week she had noticed something different about him. He was not rude. He was not disobedient. He simply stayed in the background. He answered questions only when asked directly, and even then his voice was so soft that other students leaned forward to hear him. During recess, he often stood alone or sat near the edge of the playground. Sometimes he watched the other children run and laugh, but he rarely joined them. It wasn't that the other children avoided him. They had tried to include him at first, but after many quiet refusals, they had stopped asking. Miss Carter had gently tried to encourage him. She paired him with friendly classmates during group work. She praised his homework when it was neat and complete, which it often was. Daniel was not a poor student. In fact, he seemed thoughtful and careful. He just seemed far away. As the morning lessons began, the classroom filled with the usual sounds of pencils moving across paper and pages turning. Miss Carter taught math first, writing simple problems on the board. Students raised their hands eagerly, competing to answer. Daniel sat in the back row near the window. Sunlight touched his desk and he stared at it for a moment before opening his notebook. When she asked him a question, he answered correctly, though quietly. His mind was sharp, that much was clear. After math came reading time. The class gathered on the carpet in front of her rocking chair. She read a story about a young boy who found courage in unexpected ways. The children listened closely. Some reacted with excitement, others with laughter. Miss Carter glanced at Daniel during the story. He was watching her carefully, almost studying every word she spoke. His expression did not change much, but his eyes were focused, thoughtful. When lunchtime arrived, the room emptied quickly. The children hurried outside, eager to eat and play. Daniel packed his things slowly. He moved as if he had nowhere to rush to. Miss Carter watched him quietly. She had learned not to push too hard. Trust took time, especially with children who carried silent thoughts. The afternoon brought art class, something most of the students had been waiting for. The moment she announced it, cheers filled the room. "Today," she said with a smile, "I want you to draw something about your home. It can be your house, your family, your favorite room, or even something that makes you feel safe." The sound of excitement grew as children began discussing what they would draw. One girl quickly started sketching her dog in the backyard, or a boy drew a big television in his living room. Another carefully drew her entire family sitting at a dinner table. Miss Carter walked between the desks, offering encouragement and gentle suggestions. She loved seeing how differently each child understood the same instruction. When she reached Daniel's desk, she noticed something. He was not drawing. His paper was blank. His pencil rested beside it, untouched. He was staring at the white page as if it were asking him a difficult question. "Is everything okay?" she asked softly. He nodded slightly, but did not look at her. She moved on, giving him space. Sometimes children needed quiet time before they began. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. When she glanced back at him again, she saw that he had finally picked up his pencil. His movements were slow, careful. He was not using bright colors like the others. Instead, he pressed his pencil harder than necessary, making darker lines. The classroom buzzed with happy chatter, but Daniel worked in silence. Miss Carter felt a small sense of curiosity. She didn't want to assume anything. Art could mean many things. Still, she paid closer attention without making it obvious. Eventually, students began bringing their drawings to her desk one by one. They proudly explained what they had created. She praised their effort and imagination. Daniel remained seated. He stared at his paper for a long moment after finishing. Then, almost as if he had gathered courage from somewhere deep inside, he stood up. His steps were slow as he walked toward her desk. Miss Carter looked up and smiled, expecting another simple picture of a house or family scene. Daniel held the paper out toward her with both hands. His fingers were slightly shaking. His voice, barely louder than a whisper, broke through the classroom noise. "What is this, miss?" For a brief second, she thought he might be joking or unsure about how to describe his drawing. She prepared to respond lightly, maybe ask him what he thought it was, but something in his tone stopped her. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't pride. It sounded like confusion. Like he was truly asking a question he did not understand himself. Miss Carter gently took the paper from his hands, and in that quiet moment, as the rest of the class continued laughing and coloring behind them, she looked down at the drawing. The peaceful morning no longer felt the same. Something had shifted. When Miss Carter looked down at the paper in her hands, time seemed to slow. The classroom was still full of noise. Children laughing, chairs moving, crayons rolling across desks. But for her, everything became distant and quiet. The drawing was not bright or colorful like the others. There were no smiling faces, no pets, no sunny skies. Instead, the page was filled with heavy pencil marks. In the center stood a small stick figure. The figure was drawn lightly, almost faint, as if it could disappear at any moment. Next to it was a much larger shape, dark and shaded over and over again until the paper looked almost torn. Around the smaller figure were lines that went in many directions. Some were sharp, some were messy. Above the small figure were small drops, drawn again and again, like rain, but it was clear they were not meant to be rain. Miss Carter's fingers tightened slightly around the paper. She had seen children draw sad pictures before. Sometimes they had bad days. Sometimes they argued with siblings. Children expressed feelings in simple ways, but this felt different. She slowly lifted her eyes and looked at Daniel. He stood in front of her desk, watching her face carefully, not nervously, not even afraid. Just waiting. "What is this, miss?" he asked again, softly. His question did not sound like he was asking for praise. It sounded like he truly did not understand what he had drawn. Miss Carter swallowed gently and forced herself to keep her expression calm. The worst thing she could do was react too quickly. Children noticed every small change in an adult's face. "It's your drawing," she said gently. "Can you tell me about it?" Daniel looked down at the paper, then back at her. He shrugged slightly. "It's home," he said. Just one word. Home. She looked at the page again, studying the details more closely. The larger dark shape had no face, but its arms were raised. The smaller figure stood very still beside it. There was a tiny square in the corner that might have been a window. The lines around the small figure were darker near the larger shape and lighter farther away, as if something heavy was close by. "What's happening here?" she asked softly, keeping her tone as normal as possible. Daniel's eyebrows moved slightly, like he was trying to think of the right words. "When he gets loud," he said slowly, "the air feels like this." He pointed to the messy lines. Miss Carter felt a cold wave pass through her chest. "The air feels like this?" she repeated gently. He nodded. "It gets big," he continued, pointing at the dark shape. "And I get small." Around them, the classroom was still lively. A group of students were arguing about which color to use for a tree. Someone dropped a box of crayons. Another child laughed loudly at a joke. The normal sounds of the school day continued, unaware of the quiet conversation happening at her desk. Miss Carter leaned slightly closer so she could hear him better. "Who is the big one in the picture?" she asked carefully. Daniel hesitated. His fingers twisted together in front of him. "I don't know," he said. It wasn't the answer she expected. "You don't know?" she asked gently. He shook his head. "He's just big when he's loud." No blame, just simple explanation. Like he was describing the weather. Miss Carter had taken training classes before. They had shown examples of how children sometimes show fear or confusion through drawings, but nothing in those classes prepared her for this moment. Because this wasn't a picture in a training book. This was one of her students standing in front of her. "Do you feel small like this a lot?" she asked quietly. Daniel looked at the drawing again. Then he nodded once. The nod was slow, certain. Her throat felt tight, but she forced herself to stay steady. Children needed calm adults, especially when they were trying to speak about something they did not fully understand. "Does anyone else see this?" she asked. He frowned slightly. "See what?" "The loud," she clarified gently. He thought for a moment. "No," he said. "It's just in the house." The way he said it made it clear. To him, this was normal. Something that stayed inside the walls of his home. Something that did not belong outside. Miss Carter's mind was racing, but she kept her voice soft. "And how does it make you feel?" Daniel looked at the small stick figure again. "Like that," he said. He did not use the word scared. He did not say sad. He simply pointed. Miss Carter realized something important in that moment. Daniel was not asking her to fix something. He was not even asking for help directly. He was asking a question because he did not understand what he was experiencing. "What is this, miss?" The question echoed in her mind. He was trying to name something, trying to understand a feeling that had no clear shape in his world. She placed the paper gently on her desk and knelt so that her eyes were level with his. "Daniel," she said softly, "sometimes when people get very loud or very angry, it can make others feel small or confused, but feeling small like this is not your fault." He blinked at her, listening carefully. "It's not?" he asked. "No," she said firmly but gently. "It's not." For a brief second, his shoulders seemed to relax, just a little. The bell rang suddenly, signaling the end of art time. The sharp sound made several students jump. They began cleaning up quickly, talking about their drawings and asking if they could take them home. Daniel stayed beside her desk. "Can I keep it here?" he asked quietly, looking at his drawing. "Yes," she said. "You can leave it with me." He nodded and returned to his seat to pack his bag. As the students lined up to leave for the day, Miss Carter felt the weight of the paper sitting on her desk. It felt heavier than it should have. Just pencil marks on thin white paper, yet it carried something much bigger. Daniel joined the line, quiet as always. When he reached the door, he glanced back at her for a second. It wasn't a smile. It wasn't fear. It was a look of searching, as if he was waiting to see if she understood. She gave him a small, reassuring nod. He turned and walked out with the rest of the class. When the room was empty, the silence felt different from the peaceful morning quiet. This silence was thick with thought. Miss Carter sat down slowly and picked up the drawing again. She traced the dark shape with her eyes. The pencil had pressed so hard in some places that the paper was nearly torn. She whispered softly to herself, "Oh, Daniel." But she also knew she had to be careful. Acting too quickly without understanding could cause harm. Acting too slowly could allow harm to continue. The sun outside the window was beginning to lower in the sky. The golden morning light was gone, replaced by softer afternoon shadows. Just a few hours ago, everything had felt ordinary. Now nothing did. And the question remained in her mind, steady and heavy. What is this? The rest of the day passed in a strange blur for Miss Carter. She finished her lessons, smiled when needed, and spoke in her usual calm voice. But inside, her thoughts kept returning to Daniel's drawing and the way he had asked that quiet question. When the final bell rang and the hallway filled with the sound of children rushing toward the exit, she stayed seated at her desk for a moment. Daniel had already left with the others, walking slowly as always, his backpack hanging loosely from one shoulder. He did not look different from any other child walking home. And yet, she knew something was not right. She picked up the drawing again, the small figure. The large, dark shape, the heavy lines, the raised arms. It was not just a picture. It was a feeling placed on paper. She remembered the way he had said, "When he gets loud, the air feels like this." He did not describe events. He described the air, the space, the feeling. That told her more than clear words ever could. Miss Carter leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes for a moment. She had always believed that teaching was more than reading and writing. It was about noticing. It was about protecting. But knowing something might be wrong and proving it were two different things. She could not accuse anyone. She could not jump to conclusions. But she also could not pretend she had not seen what she saw. The next morning, she arrived at school even earlier than usual. She wanted time to think. The sky was still pale and the parking lot was nearly empty. As she unlocked her classroom door, she felt a quiet determination growing inside her. She placed Daniel's drawing in a folder and set it inside her desk drawer. She did not want other students to see it. It was private. It mattered. When the students began arriving, she watched Daniel closely. He entered the classroom the same way he always did. Quiet, careful, almost invisible. He nodded when she greeted him and went straight to his seat by the window. Throughout the morning, she noticed small details she had missed before. When someone in the hallway slammed the locker, Daniel flinched. When another teacher raised her voice slightly while giving instructions outside, he froze for just a second before lowering his head. They were tiny reactions. So small that most people would not notice. But now, Miss Carter saw them clearly. During recess, instead of going to the playground, Daniel sat on the bench near the wall. Miss Carter walked outside slowly, pretending to supervise as usual. She stood near him, not too close, not too far. "Beautiful day," she said softly. He nodded. "Do you like sitting here?" she asked. "It's quiet," he replied. She sat down on the other end of the bench. "Daniel," she began gently, "yesterday, when you showed me your drawing, I've been thinking about it." He looked down at his shoes. "I didn't mean to draw it," he said quickly. Her heart ached at those words. "You don't have to be sorry," she replied. "Drawings are just ways to show feelings. There's nothing wrong with that." He stayed silent. "Sometimes," she continued carefully, "when something feels confusing or big, it helps to talk about it." "I don't know what it is," he whispered. There it was again. "Not fear. Not anger. Confusion." She turned slightly toward him, keeping her voice steady. "When you say you don't know what it is, do you mean the loud?" "It starts small," he explained quietly. "Then it gets big, and I try to be quiet so it stops." Miss Carter felt her chest tighten. "And does it stop?" she asked softly. "Sometimes," he said. "Sometimes not." The playground noise seemed far away. The other children were laughing and running, unaware of this quiet conversation. "Daniel," she said gently, "when the loud happens, do you feel safe?" He hesitated. After a long pause, he shook his head. It was a small movement, but it carried so much weight. Miss Carter took a slow breath. She knew she had to choose her next words carefully. "It's important for every child to feel safe," she said, "at school. And at home." He looked up at her for the first time since they started talking. "Is it bad?" he asked. The question surprised her. "Is what bad?" she asked. "The loud." He was not asking for judgment. He was asking for understanding. "It's not okay for someone to make you feel small or unsafe," she said gently. "That's not how things are supposed to be." "So what is it?" he asked again. This time his voice was steadier, almost hopeful. Miss Carter felt tears sting her eyes, but she blinked them away quickly. "It's not your fault," she said firmly. "That's what it is." He stared at her. "As adults," she continued carefully, "it's our job to make sure children feel protected. If something makes you feel scared or confused, it's important for grown-ups to know." His fingers tightened around his sleeve. "Will someone be in trouble?" he asked softly. That question broke her heart more than anything else. She realized that even now, he was not thinking about himself first. He was worried about what might happen if he spoke. "I don't know what will happen yet," she answered honestly. "But I do know that your safety matters." He was quiet again. The bell rang, signaling the end of recess. Children began lining up to return to class. As Daniel stood, he paused for a moment. "Miss?" he said. "Yes." "Are you sure?" She looked at him steadily. "I am sure." For the first time since she had known him, she saw something change in his expression. It was not a full smile. Not yet. But it was a small release. Like he had been holding his breath for a long time and had finally let a little air out. Back in the classroom, Miss Carter felt the weight of responsibility settle firmly on her shoulders. She could not ignore what Daniel had shared. She had enough reason to be concerned. Enough reason to take the next step. But it still felt heavy. After school that day, she walked to the counselor's office. Each step felt slower than usual. Her hand paused briefly before knocking on the door. When she stepped inside and began explaining what she had seen and heard, her voice stayed calm. She described the drawing, the words Daniel had used, the way he reacted to loud sounds. She did not exaggerate. She did not assume. She simply shared the truth. As she spoke, she felt her heart pounding. When she finished, the counselor nodded thoughtfully. "You did the right thing by coming," the counselor said gently. Miss Carter hoped so. That night, she lay awake longer than usual. Her mind replayed Daniel's voice again and again. "What is this, miss?" It was more than a question about a drawing. It was a child trying to name something that had no clear shape in his world. And now she had answered him in the only way she could. "It's not your fault." But she knew the story was not over. The morning after Miss Carter spoke with the school counselor felt heavier than the ones before. The sky outside was gray, and a soft wind pushed dry leaves across the parking lot. She sat in her car for a few extra seconds before stepping out. Her hands rested on the steering wheel as she took a slow breath. She had done what she believed was right. She had shared her concerns. She had described Daniel's drawing in his quiet words. The counselor had listened carefully and assured her that the school would follow the proper steps. There were clear procedures for situations like this. Professionals would handle it gently and respectfully. Still, knowing that did not make her heart feel lighter. When she entered the classroom, everything looked the same as always. The desks were in their places. The board was clean. The posters on the walls were bright and cheerful. But inside her, nothing felt ordinary anymore. The students began arriving one by one. They laughed, talked, and dropped their bags beside their desks. Life moved forward, unaware of the quiet tension she carried. Then Daniel walked in. He looked the same as he had the day before. Quiet, careful, almost invisible. He gave her a small nod when she greeted him. She searched his face for any sign of change, any sign that he sensed something different. There was nothing obvious, but she knew that today, or very soon, adults outside the classroom would begin asking questions. Not in a harsh way, not in a frightening way, just careful conversations. Still, the thought of it made her chest tighten. During the morning lesson, Daniel seemed focused. He completed his work slowly but correctly. Once or twice she noticed him glance at her, as if checking whether she was still there. Each time she offered a calm smile. After lunch, the school counselor quietly entered the classroom and asked if Daniel could come for a short talk. The request was gentle, casual, just like any other meeting. Miss Carter felt the room tilt slightly in her mind, even though her face stayed calm. "Daniel," she said softly, "the counselor would like to see you for a few minutes." He froze for a second. Not long, just a small pause. Then he nodded and stood up. As he walked toward the door, he looked back at her. It was the same searching look he had given her before. The look that asked without speaking, "Are you still with me?" She gave him a steady nod. He followed the counselor out. The classroom suddenly felt too loud. The ticking of the clock seemed sharper. The scratch of pencils against paper felt amplified. Miss Carter continued teaching, but part of her attention remained fixed on the empty seat near the window. Minutes felt like hours. Her thoughts raced. Would he feel scared? Would he think he had done something wrong? Would he regret telling her anything? She reminded herself that trained professionals knew how to speak with children kindly. They would not pressure him. They would simply listen. Still, waiting was the hardest part. When Daniel finally returned, nearly an hour later, he walked quietly back to his desk. His face looked thoughtful but not distressed. That small detail allowed her to breathe again. She did not ask him questions in front of the class. She simply continued the lesson. At the end of the day, as students packed their bags, Daniel approached her desk. "Miss?" he said softly. "Yes, Daniel?" "They just asked about the loud," he said. Her heart beat faster, but she kept her voice steady. "Okay," she replied gently. "I told them what it feels like," he continued. "That was very brave," she said. He looked down at his hands. "Am I in trouble?" he asked quietly. The question struck her deeply. "No," she answered immediately. "You are not in trouble. Talking about your feelings is never wrong." He studied her face, making sure she meant it. "Okay," he whispered. As he walked away, she felt both relief and worry at the same time. Relief that he had spoken. Worry about what would happen next. Over the next few days, more conversations took place. Meetings were arranged carefully. Adults spoke with calm voices and patient expressions. The goal was not to blame. It was to understand. It was to make sure Daniel felt safe and supported. Miss Carter was asked to share everything again in detail. She described his drawing, his words, his reactions to loud noises. She stayed factual and clear. She did not add drama. The truth was enough. Each evening she went home feeling drained. She questioned herself constantly. Had she overreacted? But then she remembered his voice. I get small. That was not imagination. That was a feeling. One afternoon, Daniel did not come to school. The absence notice was brief. He would be out for a few days. Miss Carter's mind filled with worry. Change, even positive change, could feel scary for a child. She hoped he was somewhere calm, somewhere quiet. The classroom felt different without him. His empty desk by the window seemed louder than the other desks combined. She found herself glancing at it often. The other students continued their routines. They did not know the full story, and they did not need to. For them, it was just another week of school. But for Miss Carter, every day without him felt uncertain. She replayed her decision again and again in her mind. Reporting her concerns had not been easy. It had required courage. It had required trust in the system designed to protect children. She knew that ignoring the signs would have been easier in the moment. That she could have told herself it was just a drawing, just imagination. But she also knew that silence can sometimes allow fear to grow. On the third day of his absence, she received a quiet update from the counselor. Daniel was safe. Temporary arrangements were being made to ensure he felt secure and supported. There would be follow-up visits, careful monitoring, gentle guidance. The words "Daniel is safe" echoed in her mind like a soft bell. That night, for the first time in days, she slept deeply. When Daniel returned to school the following week, he looked different. Not in a dramatic way. Not with a big smile or loud energy. It was something smaller. His shoulders were not as tense. His steps were not as cautious. He still walked quietly, but he did not seem as weighed down. When he entered the classroom, Miss Carter greeted him warmly. "Welcome back, Daniel." He nodded. "Thank you," he said. It was the first time she had heard him say thank you without being prompted. Throughout the day, she noticed other small changes. He raised his hand once during reading time. Just once. But it was enough to make her heart swell. During recess, he still chose the bench, but this time another student sat beside him, and he did not move away. After school, he approached her desk again. "Miss?" he said. "Yes?" "It's quieter now," he told her. The words were simple, but they carried meaning. She felt emotion rise in her chest. "I'm glad," she replied softly. He hesitated for a moment. "You said it wasn't my fault," he continued. "That's right. I think you're right," he said. In that moment, Miss Carter understood something deeply. Reporting her concerns had been frightening. Waiting had been painful. Doubting herself had been exhausting. But protecting a child's sense of safety was worth every heavy moment. She had not solved everything. Life was still complex. Healing took time, but one thing had changed. Daniel no longer looked as small as the figure in his drawing, and that, she knew, meant the decision she made, the hard, uncertain, frightening decision, had truly mattered.